So I've been doing this now for about 5 years. I also come from the Power Pivot and Excel world. Back when that came out, it was very revolutionary. It was tabular modeling and relationships and all these cool things and 1,000,000+ rows that you could throw into a data set and just start putting it in pivot tables, putting it in charts and graphs. Eventually, like Power View came out for a few of you who might have unfortunately remembered that heavy, uncomfortable thing that existed in Excel. I can't harp on it too much, though, because it did become Power BI. It's the grandfather that just didn't work very well. But we have a much better solution for it today, which is Power BI Desktop. And that's what I live and breathe in with all of my work. I do consulting training, local and remote, and a lot of blogging, video content online. This year, I just actually did a count. By December, I will have, including meetup groups and conferences, I will have hit 24 of them since January. Including Past Summit, I just got accepted to 2 weeks ago to present at the Past Summit up in Redmond. So I'm really excited that I managed to get that within my first 12 months of doing event submissions. So that's kind of a nice little milestone to check off. For those not familiar, it's like a really very large, like kind of big deal SQL and data analytics summit that's supposedly really hard to get into, but they happen to like the topics that I had to submit to them. Other than that, been an MVP for a couple of years now. Also just got my renewal in July. So I got the second disc to kind of add on to my little award trophy that they brought into it. That mostly comes from events like this, blogging online. If you haven't used it yet, I would recommend the Power BI community. It's an amazing forum that Microsoft has done a very good job of giving people MVP awards in exchange essentially for non-monetary contributions. So if you're an expert and possess expertise and knowledge and you share that back for free with the community, including questions on this forum, it gets you points towards earning your MVP status per year. So they basically are helping us by giving us recognition, and in return, there's MVPs like myself who will answer community questions on those. So if you go to that, you post a question, a detailed question that maybe has a couple screenshots, potentially even a file with some dummy data in it, ask for help. There's a good chance in 24 to 48 hours you'll have somebody immediately hopping on to that, like a top tier expert, and then they'll answer the question, help you out with it. I occasionally use it for support myself, even just to check to see if somebody else has had a question that I've had. But it's a great way to get a lot of free help without having to go pay a consultant for those. So smaller questions, absolutely go explore that. It's really good for self-learning, and it's, I think, an undervalued thing with a lot of people who just don't realize the level of expertise that exists on there. Go ahead and get started with this. Like I said, this is kind of a presentation that will talk about unlocking a lot of creative ways to use visualizations. Split primarily into two parts. The first half is going to cover native visualizations and features. So all of these things are going to include things you can do with the built-in visuals into Power BI without having to do any fancy layering, anything that's really kind of hacking the system in that sense. Fairly basic applications that give you really cool results. Moving on from that, we're going to talk about a few more advanced things with custom KPI cards, Sparklines, things where you can actually layer elements together. The day that I kind of realized that, like with an opaque background, you can kind of put things on top of each other in Power BI and make it look like one single thing. That was like a big pivotal moment for me when I had come from the previous world of, like you don't want anything to touch, everything should be separate, there's no like on top of each other stuff. Everybody gets their own space, and that was how I used to build Power BI reports. I didn't think of it like a PowerPoint where you could layer objects together. There's still some caveats to a few of those because you can't group yet, which is going to be coming someday soon. But there's a lot of cool things that we're going to do with layering elements, and a few visuals that you can add from the marketplace to create some of these as well. So we'll go through these, and then if time permitting, have a few extra little fun things at the end that we can cover as well. That's really hard for me. I move around a lot.
Just like Rachel.
Well, thankfully for me, I'm doing a demo and not a talk, because otherwise I would be back and forth the entire night.
I hear you.
Yeah, you just got to have the camera guy follow me. All right. Hopefully this thing isn't too laggy. Let's go to number 1. So with each one of these two, I want to see if you can guess how they were made. So trick, kind of design element number 1. We have... so hard for me. I hate. Yeah, see, it's not. I hate being behind that because it's like presenter rule number 1: do not put a barrier between you and the audience. Is it possible? Can you track me and get audio, or do I have to stand behind there?
Well, it's mostly lighting.
Okay.
It's very dark.
You're killing me. It's like going against the presenter nature. Like your barriers are bad.
Oh, that's way better.
There you go. You know what? Just keep telling me that. It's going to encourage me to stay here in my box. All right. Was that? It is. But how did I get the dots? Can anybody guess how I got these conditional formatted dots on there? You cannot do that on a line chart.
Bar chart, flip over.
Exactly. Yes. So the only way to get this is by having to do a bar chart first and then converting it afterwards. So I'll show you the issue that we're having right now is the fact that on this visualization, it's always the screen recorders make things lag so bad. All right. If I go to data colors, you'll notice in here, there's no little ellipses here that lets me do advanced conditional formatting. In fact, none of these icons here are showing up as any kind of color formatting that I've applied to this. So the trick that I did to get this, and I actually stumbled across this on accident when I ended up just converting it a visual, and I think I did a format painter, and it just showed up. So it's kind of like failed successfully when you realize that there's kind of a, is it a bug or a feature in Power BI? I think it's a, I'm going to assume that it's something that they neglected to account for, but they haven't fixed it in over a year, so I'm hoping it stays this way. But if you start with a clustered column chart, which does have options for that advanced conditional formatting. That's the thing that, if you're familiar or if you're curious about this, I don't want to dive into the weeds on exactly how to explain the advanced conditional formatting here, but I do have a video that I can reference anybody who's curious about it. But I just want to show you the general concept. This opens up a window here. So much slower. There you go. And then basically just set up any rule set. You know, if a condition, return a result. You know, conditional formatting like in Excel, like in Power BI. So if I set it up on this, that conditional formatting doesn't go away. What it does is it just simply converts to those dots that you see appearing on this line. So that's the one way to kind of get a... I know.
I'll just point.
Yeah, there you go. So against nature. All right. So yeah, any of those dots that are appearing on there will basically be a legacy thing imported over from that. So like I said, it's not something that's officially advertised, so it might go away at some point. So the one caveat is if you publish this as part of a production report, just assume that there's a 5% or less chance that it might just disappear. But it's a nice way that I've found, and I actually have it in a few of mine, and I just let the customer know. So they at least, as long as they're aware of it, it doesn't come back to you of like, why did this feature disappear? Everybody that I've told about, they've been fine with it, and they say if we lose it, we lose it. So nobody's said, no, I don't want to publish this because of that caveat. But I like to be able to add a bit of metadata in there. It's not too noisy, and it's just kind of a nice way to be able to know, you know, where's those cutoff points for the, in this case, colors for various KPIs. That is the only thing that can exist. It appears as a dot. There's no way to shape the dots to have squares or triangles like a few other things. But it's a kind of a nice little fun element for that. Is anybody unfamiliar with actually how to turn on the step layout? Or who here has not seen that before on a line chart? A couple people. All right. It'll be a 5-second thing just to show you. They added that about a year ago. I like it. I think it's a lot less just harsh than the jagged lines. So I prefer the step layouts that show the width of the actual axis elements that are on the bottom in terms of either the categories or in the time dimension. So that's something that's simply turned on down here, angles versus stepped. And I don't know, there's no way really to easily smooth those lines that much. I would love it if it was a much more like smooth transition. You can bevel the tips, but it's not enough for me, so I usually just tick those on, just as a fun, fancy feature for that. Trick number 2 that I have on this one as well. This just came out last June. So previously, there was a custom visual that let you essentially accomplish this thing up here. Notice that I have a little question mark in my updated header at the top. When you hover over this, what you get is a tooltip that pops up that provides some text information. I just have random text in there that I copied from online, but it's something that can give people context about what they see. So if you have a visualization that has a lot of measures and metrics, or even maybe some notes about what they're looking at, you can type it in there, and it's basically a tooltip for the visual itself that just gives additional context. There was a custom visual that you could just layer on top of for it. That was a question mark that would allow you to do that. But then you had to download a custom visual. It is one more thing to render on the page. So having that included in every single visual as an option is really useful.
So can you just say how you got that again?
Yeah, I'll turn that on in here in just a minute. So for any visual in Power BI, it's part of the visual header. So at the very bottom down here, let me zoom out just a little bit. So notice that there's two menus. This menu, I'm still technically in the box. This menu, yeah, it's like reaching out of my feet are still in the box. The visual tooltip menu. I'll just point with this. There we go. I just like to use my hands. That will turn on if you open up the visual header, and then this thing here toggles it. So with it off, the icon will disappear. When you turn it on, it both toggles it plus gives you access to this additional menu. Now the menu itself has two important features. By default, it can just return text. So like with any other like titles or anything, you can type in freeform text or copy and paste it. Unfortunately, the limit is 250 characters. So sometimes you might want notes a little bit bigger than that. So I'll show you the report tooltip that I did. But the default action is just this. When it pops up, and you have a certain number of characters to explain what you need to. What I did is for the times that you need more of it, you can technically attach a report tooltip to it, which is just a hidden page that you've sized and added visuals to. You saw that in the last presentation, all those little mini charts. Those are all report tooltips. I haven't found any need to really have the this info thing up here at the top show a chart because there's no filter context that's propagated through it. So even if you hover over it, there's no way to have it change for that visual. It's just always going to show the same data on that one tooltip page. So I was trying to think for a while, like, why would I ever need a report tooltip? When I discovered that there's 250 characters as a limit, well, what about if I just make a hidden page that has a text box and I can just make it as big as I want? I can add as many characters as I want into there. So that's what I did with the info tooltip. It's just a hidden page. And all there is a text box with the same background, same color, and I can resize this as big as I need. So I can make it tall, wide, and fit as much information as I would want to in there. Even actually include some, what is it called, rich text. So any additional formatting with bold, italicized stuff that you couldn't actually put into that little box can now all be done in here. So it gives you just more creative freedom to customize that little tooltip that pops up there. But I love that. It's most of the reports that I built, there's probably one or two elements on the page that now use this just to give somebody a little edge towards the right direction. Because I've definitely learned with customers that any opportunity there is to be confused or have something break, they will be confused or they will break it. So anything I can provide to them to make sure that doesn't happen, like little info boxes, is one less email that I get about something that they don't understand. So it's a welcome feature that they brought in there.
Will those custom tooltips work on through the mobile app for iPad and iPhone at this point? When they first introduced the custom tooltip pages, they wouldn't work.
Correct. And I believe they still are not working. Tooltips do. They actually just did a round of updates where now there's like a press and hold and a few other features that are supposed to make mobile interaction easier. And I know the default ones are, but last I checked, there was not report tooltips on the roadmap. So that's a good question. This will be available with a built-in one, but I would assume that then the report tooltip just wouldn't render if you are using Power BI Mobile, specifically in the app on the phone. If you were opening it in browser, it would still work, but it's kind of a clunkier interface that way. All right. Any questions on this before I move on to item number 2? OK. They got all out of order. Each one of these, I'd like to see if you can guess how I did it. What type of visual do you think this is? Trying to hide the other things there. Yes, it's a matrix table. It doesn't really look like a matrix table, but it is. I cannot take credit for the actual idea of this. When I was doing my site data for Google Analytics, I saw this on their dashboard, and it was exactly like by day of week and time of day. And they had a heat map grid where, like, that's really nice. How can I rebuild this in Power BI? Because I want this in my own report. So I actually did find a couple heat maps that were available on the custom visual store, but they were a bit slower, not very customizable. And in general, custom visuals are great when you have to use them, but I try to do as much as possible custom development with native visuals, because they're going to be faster, less likely to break. They're usually just a lot more optimized in terms of the code, because you have much more development process with the developers typically. So that's what I did in the matrix table here. Now the trick, though, in this is how do you think I got the data labels essentially to not show? Because there's no option in format to turn off data labels for the matrix table.
Match the color to the font.
Yep. So 2 conditional formats were applied. I did the same color logic for background color and the same color logic for font color. So because they're always going to match, they basically blend into each other. So I can show that pretty quickly on a unformatted one. That's the original table. And in general, if I have things like this, it's, once you get to a sea of information with no additional formatting, your eyes start to cross when you're trying to look at the data. So it's like, how did I make it more, or how can I make this more intuitive was my thinking behind it. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, it's kind of like layering visuals. I didn't think in my head, like, well, what about if I tried to add more than one conditional format? I thought it was you had to pick one or the other. I didn't think that you could maybe add more than one of them at a time. But in theory, you can add all 4. You could add an icon, a data bar, a background, and font color. But I would hope you wouldn't do that many. It'd be a little noisy. So let's do a nice and quick one. Background color. So long to pop up these things. There you go. All right. I'll even throw a divergent in there. It's actually part of another talk, but the type of color that I'm doing right now in terms of color logic would be considered a divergent color set. And the reason I'm putting white in the middle is I honestly only care about my highs and my lows. The middle information I kind of would rather just ignore. So putting that as white kind of makes it disappear and draws my focus more to the information that I care about. So that's why I like to add that center color. I'd probably do something more with blues, but this is the quick and easy version of it. And then I'll do the same thing in a second with font colors. There we go. Getting closer, but not quite there. It's still kind of noisy with all those other data labels. And honestly, I don't need that. If I want the numbers, I can still hover with the tooltip and get them. But I want to strip the noise out of this. And then diverging, diverging. There we go. Nope. And it will continually render at the same time, so there's never a point where you'll click a slicer and then one color changes before another. They always render, thankfully, at the same time as when these visuals reprocess. So I've not ever seen a glitch where there's been an issue where it kind of, you see the wizard behind the curtain for half a second before it fixes itself. Other hacks that I talk about sometimes do occasionally do that, so it's like 95% perfect. This one works 100% of the time, every time. So it's a kind of nice way to, I think, take you out of the box to think that a matrix table doesn't just have to be a table of numbers like and a grid of information like you're used to seeing in pivot tables in Excel. They can be used as a visualization tool with heat maps and a lot of other cool things. Icon sets, by the way, just came out this month. So those little KPI icons that can sit next to your number just released about 5 days ago in Power BI. I actually do have a video that I just did on it as well that I'll link you to at the end of the session. But those are something that were requested for years in Excel. And it's all the same icon sets. Sorry, all the same icon sets from Excel that are now in Power BI. All right. Any questions on this before I move on to number 3? All right, let's go to, here we are. Now this one's part visual, part feature in Power BI Desktop. One that I didn't realize until about a couple years ago, but it's this one specifically. So I created a column that essentially allowed me to see distribution of the data. There are histogram custom visuals you can download. I always have to preface to say I'm hoping the person who made it is not sitting in the room, but it's a really bad visual. Last it was updated, to be fair, it says like 2017 is the histogram chart that you can download from the custom visual store. I didn't realize you can actually add a histogram column directly into Power BI with bins as a native feature. And I, again, kind of stumbled across it one day and realized how amazing of a feature it was. And I think a lot of people are not aware of it. Who here did not know you could create bins directly in Power BI? Few people. OK, there you go. Yeah, it's something actually that's based off of groups. Like you can create groups off of columns. I knew you could do that with text. I didn't realize there were other options with numbers and dates to make bins off of them. So I'll show you how I made that.
Is the reason why you didn't flip the columns with the X and Y axes because you needed to have it a little bit longer so that you could fit it within the current custom visual that you have?
Well, this is just a standard built-in just column chart.
Right. But just for ease of visualization, right? Because if you're looking at it, you kind of have to turn your head sideways to see what the numbers are.
Oh, you mean you're referring to the data labels?
That's right.
Yeah. So it's based off of the number they're in there. I flipped them to get them to still fit. The two options that you have in Power BI is doing that or turning on overflow. Otherwise, they disappear. And I wanted the numbers to really show. But yeah, in a real world scenario, it would be a conversation with the customer. Is that easy enough to read, or would you do something else to help account for that? Good call out though. All right. So the actual column itself that goes into here, and I'm just using public college scorecard data for this. This was actually a couple of videos that I did for UW that allowed me to discover this. But down here, notice that there's this little, still in the box, notice this little icon here for tuition and state for bins. This is something that's auto-generated inside of Power BI. Now, there's a lot of different ways to make columns, and it can sometimes be confusing. Give a bit of history. It used to be calculated columns with DAX. That was how you would add a column to the data model. That was really the only way to get new columns into Power Pivot. Since Power Queries existed, 99% of columns these days can be made there. Occasionally, if you need to have some kind of an aggregation or math being done to determine the information being returned in the column, there are still use cases for calculated columns. And then a couple of years ago, Microsoft added this option to create groups off of columns directly just with a GUID, a user interface that pops up. And it just adds that column directly into it. It is technically writing DAX in the background for you, but you don't see any of that. It auto-generates the script. So in this case, I created the bins from here. So the only things you need to do to create a bin off of any column, whether or not it's text, number, or date, you right-click on it. You select New Group, which is down here. And I'll show you kind of the options that you have for this.
Well, that loads. Quick question.
Sure.
The histogram custom visual you were talking about, was that the one Microsoft had built, or another one?
Yeah, Microsoft built one back in 2017, but you can't adjust the width between the there's like nothing to customize on it.
Yeah.
I think it was added just because it's like what Tableau has is, okay, we'll technically make one, so we can say we have it too, but then it never got maintained.
Okay.
I'm thinking partially because this exists, there's not really a need to maintain it. But yeah, by default, when you create a bin, the one that I had previously seen, which is why I didn't use it much, is you are given a list of original values from that column, and then you can kind of rearrange them. So let's say you have an org structure, and you have 35 org names. If these 3 org names all belong under Bob's team and then Mary's team, et cetera, you can just regroup them and assign them new category names. And that's what I thought the extent of the use for this was, because I had only tried this on text before. If you have dates or numbers, you have the option to create bins. Bins will basically create a range of bins for you, and your choice is either you specify the size of each bin, meaning like how wide are they to capture the data points. And in this case, if I was to set the bin size down here, it will automatically make whatever number of bins are necessary to go from my min to my max. And every time my workbook refreshes, if that range increases, then whatever setting that I have, in this case 934, it will add the appropriate number of bins to continue to capture that. Now, if I instead want to limit the number of bins that I have, instead of size, I can do number of bins. So I can say, regardless of the range of data, how big and small it is, I always want exactly 35 bins or 50, etc. So not too much to customize. It generates the rest of the code for you in the background, and it spits out the column that in this case becomes this thing down here. And then I can put unique counts or dollars or whatever is necessary in here to do basically distribution to find out where does my data mostly reside. So it's a really nice way to do a quick and easy analysis in your data, see where a lot of it is kind of focused on. And then if you need to and your customer doesn't want it, you can delete the columns really easily. By the time you publish it, you can hide it. But I like it because it's a great way to just do data exploration and get some quick insights on uncharted data, which a lot of times many customers don't really have. Any questions on this? All right, reach into my bag of tricks then. Pull out. That's number 3. They reordered themselves when I...
Can I ask you a question?
Hmm?
That's
Sure.
fine.
Oh, yeah.
So like in that one in the one in the top left.
Oh, the ribbon chart.
Yeah. So why are you trying to draw attention to the green and the gold flip positions there? What are you
It tells the journey. So as an example, I have this on my website page where traffic referrals. So historically, YouTube was like 5th ranked on mine, and in the last couple, probably 6 to 8 months, it's gone from 4th to 3rd to 2nd to 1st. So you could actually see it escalating up and climbing on top of those others. It will produce a stacked column chart, but the highest value in any single column will always be arranged on top. So if things constantly compete against each other and are changing placement, essentially in terms of their rank, it shows that journey very well. So I like to use this to show changes over time. The college scorecard data is not as good for that. It's just there because it hasn't changed too much. But if there's a lot of fluctuation in it where things can adjust dramatically, you don't have to sit there and do the mental math in your head to figure out what order they are. A regular stacked column chart won't show this change if you use just one of these. I have no way to know that without really adding every single number up in this thing that immediately changed. So all of that extra kind of story information has now been scrubbed out of it. So huge changes where, oh yeah, green's clearly bigger than blue, but some of these are close enough together, you have to do mental math to get it. So that's kind of like why I like the ribbon chart. So I was very happy when they added that. I used it in a lot of reports and recommended it to a few clients. All right, number 4.
Usually works with a few legend values.
Correct. Yeah, if you have like 85, it's way too many. It's like trying to put 50 categories on a pie chart. There's a certain like upper limit that you want for visuals like that. Pie chart is an example. Usually like 4 or less, or donut chart in this case. Still readable, but if you get nothing but just an array of like little slices, it becomes very noisy. But the one in here is less about the pie chart and more about a dynamic header that I included in report tooltips. So let me show you in here. One, we have some report tooltips that are rendering. Observe the actual title of the chart on my report tooltip. When I hover over here, 11,000 or 11 million, 13 million. So the actual header of this visual changes each time I change the filter context. Now, tooltips in general, they always take the filter context that's coming from the visual. So the element that you're hovering over that has a filter applied to it passes through that filter. And what they did recently is part of their push to do measure-based conditional formatting across all these different elements in Power BI, where you could use a measure in it. They included that in the titles. So rather than returning a static title, it can return whatever value is being spat out by a DAX measure. In this case, I simply have a measure returning a text value that's concatenating my total sales amount with the words sales in year, and then I have a unicart character in there just to make it look a little fancier. Sometimes you want to add flair. You got to have your 18 pieces of flair, making an Office Space reference there, or was it 15 or just 5?
Well, I'm just raising my hand.
Oh, question. 5 pieces of flair, yeah.
So I've just started using Tooltips, and I had that financial statement visual up there, that matrix, and I'm trying to figure out how I can hover over an expense in a month is coming in with that filter context for that current month. But have that tooltip show like the neighboring months for comparison.
Yeah. So the way to do that is you would have to do it with DAX. So there would need to be some kind of an all function that would force out the filters first. Then you'd have a second variable that would determine what is the current context there, and you would create a range. Like that context, yeah, it's possible, but it's kind of some lifting with DAX would need to be done to get a rolling window.
Customized time intelligence.
Yeah, customized time intelligence. And I've done things like that where I wanted to have like current and prior year, but the problem is if you're hovering over it, it's filtering to that exact year. So you have to all function first to remove that filter, identify it, and then create a custom filter window for the measure.
Relative date index is in your date table.
Yep.
Makes it easy.
Oh no, yeah, like I call them offsets, but have it a day, month, or day, week, month, quarter, year offsets are great. It makes time intelligence a lot easier. Ask me more about that if you're curious afterwards. But I want to show how to do this. So we take you to my tooltip page. Similar to the tooltip that I had for the little helper icon, this is just a page in here that you can create. Basically, it has a toggle to turn on to a tooltip. But I want to show you the visual and the setting that I have specifically in this header. And I won't be showing exactly how to make a tooltip here, but if you're curious on how to add these and have not seen them before, thankfully, again, I have a YouTube video on this, so just ping me offline afterwards, and I will give you the link for that. So in here, you'll notice this is very similar to what we had when I did my, on that line chart, when I had my color formatting. Conditional formatting can also be applied here. They're kind of hidden, so you actually have to look for them a little bit, but when you hover, you get an ellipses that allows you to apply conditional formatting. So if I reverted, it's just a standard text field. You know, you type in a static title for that, but I wanted something dynamic. Let me see if I can Control Z that. One sec. Get that to show up again. There we go. All right, so let's take a look. All that is in here is it's called field-based formatting, and it just simply says, what measure do you want, and I will return whatever text is coming from that measure. So yeah, format by field value, and that is just the measure name that is sitting in my model. The measure itself isn't very complex, so just show that right here. If I click it, there you go. Takes a second. And basically just have that formatted to return a text output. The actual format thing here is required because if I just referenced sales amount without this additional stuff in before it, it will return just the raw number. There will be no commas, there will be nothing else. So because this entire string is a text output, it has to be formatted. In a perfect world, it would be nice if the formatting that you have applied to the original measure somehow got passed through automatically. But it doesn't take too long just to say, you know, I want my sales amount to be converted to text and to format as a dollar and then comma separator for anything above 1,000. And then just down the line, there's the sales and year that I have in there. If you haven't used this yet, it's very fun to use. The unit char function, put the number in there. That you can just Google unit char numbers on Google. You'll get a list of icons you can use in any of those symbols. Every emoji that's on your phones has an assigned number that would work in here, and they all render in full color. So you can actually return a lot of symbols. You can do more advanced stuff that you'll see in a second, where you can actually make a KPI built into the measure that can have an up arrow, a down arrow, little graphics to kind of give you indicators. Thankfully now, icons make it easier, but they're very handy in a lot of situations. In this case, I just wanted to add a calendar symbol just to make it a bit fancier, and slightly less boring in the output.
I'm glad you showed us that. I thought earlier when you said that unicorn flare, I was thinking, he's got a unicorn up there?
Yes. I mean, there's probably a symbol for a unicorn. There's an emoji for that. We can have unicorns. The most entertaining one is the fact that the smiling poop emoji does get rendered, and it's in full color with the little smiley face. That is available as an option to use if you have really bad sales for 1 month. No down arrow, just have the poop emoji right there. I swear I've had like 1 or 2 execs who at least jokingly in a room during a training is like, no, we're using that. If I see any shit symbols on any of your computers, like we have to have a talk. It was a really fun manager. He dropped so many words that I can't even repeat in the training, which immediately just made me like, okay, I can relax, because he is completely opposite of uptight. Yeah, and like I said, essentially the standard tooltip formatting is filtering is what's re-rendering that, because this renders that page, passes through the filter for, in this case, the low, which is a category and a column on my data table. And then because that DAX measure has the sales amount, which is just a standard measure of sum of the sales amount column, that number will change depending on which element I'm hovering over. And this would work for report tooltips on a matrix table. Anywhere that you use normal report tooltips, you can get kind of a dynamic header in there. So that's, of all the time that I've spent trying to think of an interesting way to use dynamic titles, this is the best option that I've come up with. In a perfect world, I was hoping when I first tested this, the hierarchy controls where you can drill from day to month to quarter to year, I was really hoping that that could somehow be identified by a measure so the title would change to represent that. But I talked to the product team, and there's no way for that to happen. So that was my dead end of, well, why would I want a dynamic title if I can't even get it to understand the hierarchy level that I'm at in the visual itself. But this was my one solution that I came up with for it. All right. Any questions on this before we go to number 5? Okay. I think now we finally get to layered visualizations. Everything we've seen so far has been something done in one single visual. Kind of gave away one of the questions I'm going to ask. How many visualizations do you think this is? It is, yes. I was like, damn, I already gave away the answer. It is more than one. It's less than 50. Somewhere between there. It's just two. Two different elements. What specifically in here requires a second visualization? The dollar amounts at the top. It's a commonly requested feature for stacked columns. Is I don't want data labels for the subtotals. I want a grand total data label at the top. And there's no way to turn that on at the moment. In Excel, there's some ways to like have the numbers reference like a hidden column, and there's ways to do it with a bit of page manipulation. But in Power BI, there was no default way to do it. I had a client request for this, so I needed to figure out a way to do this and make sure it was also pixel perfect. The one caveat that comes with this, with layered visuals, is if you use the focus mode, it will get rid of those until you go back, because I only focused on one visual. The other one is still hidden. But other than that, it works perfectly every time, renders appropriately, and there is a hidden visual behind it that has all the elements stripped out of it. I've whited out everything in there, but it's basically layered on top of here to give I can snap that back, give the appropriate effect. They're both two visualizations, and I want to walk you through kind of little tricks that I got to get it just right, because it took a while to get the visuals to align on having the same width for the legend at the bottom, the same axis, and for both the X and the Y axis. So, was that?
You have to build that uniquely every time because of the delay?
I mean, if I was to build this on a different page, I can copy and paste it. But yeah, if I was to do a stacked column chart with the total, I would need to build both of these for that. With a format painter, you can just copy and paste it to a new workbook and use that. It saves you 99% of the time, because I've already built it once. If you're not familiar with that, by the way, like let's say you've just spent 25 minutes perfecting this. Every color, every little detail is just perfect, and you don't want to have to redo that by step one and on. You can copy and paste this with a Control-C and Control-V into any other workbook. And even if it errors out because the data's not there, you still have the ability to click Format Painter, format another visual of the same type, and it will copy over all of the format settings. So that's a really good way to jumpstart a new report if you already have a visual that has most of the work done on it in terms of the design and layout, just as an FYI. So yeah, let me duplicate this, and I want to show you kind of what I did to accomplish this. So we have a check. I'm going to go ahead and kind of reset my old one. So this is the other visualization, that basically the one in the background, if I actually put color back into it. So a couple things to note. It is a regular, if I click it, just a regular clustered column chart. Now, one of the things that I had an issue with is without the legend at the bottom, like that little extra space. I did try really hard to find ways to like rearrange it, but the problem is it started making the column slightly slower, and it didn't line up perfectly. So I was like, all right, how do I somehow make a legend in there that also doesn't subtotal my data? Because if instead of using this filler that I will show you how I made in a second, if I had used anything else in here, what it does is it breaks out the data. I would have gotten multiple subtotals. I couldn't find a way to somehow insert an empty legend that does not break apart my data in any way. So my solution was I created a completely disconnected table. Yep, I just went up here. I used that enter data button. If you're not familiar with this, it basically writes the M code for you, and you can either copy and paste or just manually type in the data. I'll show you the legend filler table that I made. But all it is, it's just one row, one column, and it just has the word legend filler. It's basically self-labeled. Pop up. Yep. Yeah. Legend filler title, legend filler in the bottom, and it's just sitting in my model. It's not connected to anything. It's only there to make sure that text gets inserted at the bottom to give it that exact same height as the original chart. But because there's no relationships to the rest of my model, it doesn't subtotal my data at all. It just sits there essentially as a vessel just to fill that spot that I needed for formatting. Yep, so it got that exact height that I needed. And then with the formatting of what I essentially did is I turned on the background color here because I needed that to be white, but I still had to have the visual in the front. It has to be transparent to show the page behind it. And proceeded to just basically apply a white color to the axis here, the numbers here, the bars here, because I didn't want anything to accidentally show through. So I just formatted everything possible except for the data labels at the top, a solid white color to make it completely disappear. And essentially achieving that effect of this. Yep, so as you can see, this is transparent. And then everything here has been turned on to have that. And the other trick that I did too is I have, well, no, I'll see if you can guess. So there's one thing that is turned off on the front one that's also turned on at the back one. Besides the data labels, what else is in the back? The grid lines. So the reason being is with the grid lines in the front, occasionally it cuts across the data labels at the top, and it kind of destroys the illusion slightly. So that was another thing. All right, well, it clearly looks like it's covering them slightly, and it should be in the background. So I turn it off from the front visual, turn that on in the back visual. This also is a video that's online, so happy to link that as well too. But it's achieving a result that I really wished existed native to Power BI. But until then, there's a solution that works well enough that I'm comfortable delivering it to clients. And as long as they understand what's happening and that the focus mode will get rid of them when you do that, again, most of them are happy to have this in the reports because it's the solution is still better than that one slight problem that it has with it.
I just realized one feature that's going to make this approach challenging when they come out with the feature where end consumers can switch the visual on their own. They're going to select the visual, and then they'll have a visual pane where they can change it to a line chart, for example.
I mean, there is options already to do that today in some extent. If you edit the report, you can change them. Bookmarks will let you toggle them as well.
It's coming in a future version.
Yeah. I don't think it's on the immediate roadmap, though, as far as I'm aware. But there are certain types of visuals that can be toggled. So yeah, if you had a line chart, but at that point, I don't even know if you'd want a grand total data label on a line chart if you had like 8 or 6 or 7 lines, because that would be really hard to kind of identify that at the top. Yeah. But yeah, like with anything stacked, there's always ways to find something that will be slightly wrong if you do X, Y, or Z. So you just want to make sure that the customer is not going to be doing that, or you have a conversation around it during deployment. Any other questions on this one? Yes.
So I had to solve this and did it a different way, but it's not my idea, but it worked pretty well. Which is you can make it a stacked line chart.
Yep.
And then you put the line chart, the shapes on the top of the line chart, and then you make that line 0.
Yep.
And it totals. It seemed to work fine for the situation that I was, but I didn't play with it.
Yeah, I've done similar. Because if you put the weights of the line to 0, it does that. The one annoying.
All you do is just make the line chart. Then so we make it a line chart.
Yeah,
the
correct.
Line chart has exactly the same.
Yep. The one annoyance that I found with this is it didn't always put it at the same spot for me when I turned that on. So let's see.
So if you do shapes,
the labels jump around. They're not always at the exact same height. So let me try that. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It's quick and dirty.
I feel like they added a feature that lets you choose where the label goes.
Yeah, because you can do this, turn it to 0. There you go. And then if you turn on labels, I think data labels on, individual data labels.
Position, is that it?
You got to customize series too. Customize series. Actually, I think then even on position, I don't think it does it quite where I want it. Let's see. So if I do position, inside end, inside center. Interesting. It should be changing, right? Yeah. But this is just right into it does get it there faster and with less caveats, but the fact that some are above and below are the annoyance that I had, which is what directed me to the other one. But they are both comparable solutions. It just depends on how particular they are at having that on the top versus kind of, the lines on a secondary axis, so it's not always exactly the same as the original axis for some reason. I would think that they would be identical because they're the same numbers either way for the grand total, but whatever logic is used to calculate the width of that axis is not always perfect between the two. Good call out, though. All right. Any other questions on this one? Okay. Got about 5 minutes left, so let me just ask the group. I can do one more. If you are okay with staying a little bit past 8 o'clock at least for the presentation part. Otherwise, I usually use the last 5 minutes to just to talk a bit about links and everything else.
We're not going anywhere.
Okay, that's what I figured. But I want to check, I don't want to keep anybody here when they don't want to be. So this is number 5. I can pick between a couple. So let's do this one.
I just want to warn everybody, the air conditioning comes on after 8.
I was gonna say it's getting a little warm up here. Yeah. How many visuals do you think this is?
More than one.
Yes, that is technically correct. It is more than one. Again, it's the often when you are forced against a wall that broods creative ways to think about how to invent stuff. My logic kind of behind building this, and I'll just show you my Google Analytics report that I built for myself as an example of fitting it into place. Power BI reports are in many ways like it's like building with Legos or better said Tetris. You have to get all the pieces to configure and fit just right, and your report canvas is a bit like water in California, or at least it used to be, where it's very scarce and you don't have that much of it. The joke doesn't work as well anymore because they're not in a drought. But there's only so many pixels that you have to fit stuff. So I wanted to create cards. This should hopefully render at the top. Last time it's been having some issues, so yeah, it's weird. There we go. Okay. I wanted to be able to create cards at the top that both had like a sparkline and a visual that fit in a small form. I've tried a few other ones, but they had to be taller, they had to be wider, and it didn't quite work in a form factor that was small enough to my liking. So I figured out a way to layer a few visuals to create those. This is also a better example of that ribbon chart. As I mentioned, my YouTube shot up quite a bit from prior things, so that's a great path of that journey of site traffic to my website. But for the cards, at least, 2 visuals were used for that. And then a little trick that I did on top of it. So let me go back to this right here. Let's zoom in a bit. Enhance. There we go. So there's 2 visuals here. There is custom visual, which, by the way, if you've not used them yet, one of the few custom visuals producers that I really like is OKViz. OKViz is a branch of SQL BI. You might be familiar with Marco Russo or Belter Ferrari, the DAX gurus. They're who MVPs go to, like myself, when we have a problem with DAX and we can't get it to go faster. But they also have outsourced a lot of development to, I forget his name, but they have one developer who makes all of their custom visuals, and they're essentially the best that exist out there in the marketplace that are free. So they're really nice. They make a really pretty looking little sparkline in here. This is the kind of sparkline that I like. Power BI's lines, unfortunately, are very jagged. There's no way to smooth them. I really wish there was a smoothing option that got you lines more accustomed to this. It looks better for me on paper. But you can make them really compact. And I actually layered that on the bottom of a single value card, which is a native visualization. One actual final touch that I do with these, because again, I try to break stuff so I can make sure that I can avoid my customer doing that. So I click around, I see what would happen in scenarios of a customer doing that, and I wanted to avoid this. If I click it, today, right now, Power BI does not have an option to make a visual inactive. There should be some toggle where you can force it into the background and it just stays statically in the background and does not pop forward. At some point in the near future, they're going to have groups, meaning I can actually multi-select visuals and wrap them together just like PowerPoint, that this situation will go away. But in the meantime, to avoid this, because honestly, unless they're making a dashboard, which I think 20% of all reports that I build these days, does anybody ever use a dashboard on top of it? That's the one thing that goes away when I cover this up with an invisible object. But otherwise, there's no reason for them to click on a card. There's no interactions with it. The card doesn't do anything. The one thing you might get, maybe if they cared enough, is they can technically hover over the sparkline and get the individual data points. But that's really designed to be supplemented by the other visuals on your page. Sparkline is just a quick glimpse of, is it up, is it down? So I actually cover this with another visual. Can anybody guess what that visual would be? That actually would work too if you turn off the borders. I use a text box, but essentially just a clear object. So I'm going to go back to this. So as an example up here, the entire top section is actually completely framed with a text box. Because I have quite a few layered elements in here. All of those sparklines are layered. I actually have a couple of images and boxes and stuff over there. And with any of those, if you have something in the background and you click on an element, it will pop it up and give that, it looks like your web page is broken kind of look. So cover it with an entire text box. I do make sure to turn off the visual header, because if you do not turn that off, when they hover over the text box or any object on your page, they get a more options icon showing up. And you don't want that, again, to kind of ruin the illusion of it's kind of just smoothed out in your background. So with this turned off and that in the front in your selection pane, they will never be able to click anything that causes something to kind of get screwy. Who here has used Power BI but has never used the selection pane before? Everybody's used it. That's good. This is one thing that, just like PowerPoint, your selection pane determines your order of how things are layered. So it's if you need to make sure that something is always on top of something else, that's where the selection pane comes in handy. Two kind of final things that I'll point out in here. As a best practice for me, I label everything in there. As you can see, when you have a lot of elements on your report page, if this was all called Chart 1, Chart 2, Chart 3, Slicer 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to be really hard to remember which thing in there represents what until you click on it and then like see what's being highlighted on your page. So I give a custom name to everything. It's just like naming your tables and your charts in Excel. It's a good practice to have when you end up with 50 of them in your report. Perfect world, you could just right-click on this and say rename. The only way to rename an element, you have to turn on the title, you name it in the title, and then you turn the title back off. So there's not a separate element name, and it's not the easiest thing. So it's when I finish a report and I have to spend 15 minutes doing this, I do not like it, but I do it because it's a good practice to have. I have emailed the product team a few times. There needs to be an option to like double-click and rename. Even if it's updating the title, that needs to be something that exists. They say they're working on it, which so far when they've told me that, they actually are. So it sounds like that will be something coming someday. But for now, you at least know how to name elements in the selection pane. Last thing that I'll point out, I'm almost good on time. How do you think I got the number to show kind of more at the top? There's no alignment. There's no top, middle, and bottom alignment on a single value card. It always shows centered and centered. How do you think I scooted it up? What was that? No, I actually turned on kind of a clever trick. So category label is actually on. I turned it to white. So technically it's down there, but I turned it on, I turned it to white, and I basically just increased the font size until it was high enough up. That's the best way I could again, it's one of those features that there really should be an alignment option in here. So there isn't, but thankfully it gives me fun ways to find out how can I hack the system and get that to show up. So that's what I did. I still wanted to use a single value card because that is a very fast rendering object. Scooted it up and basically just placed that kind of center and align down at the bottom. Covered it with the text box. And lets me create those kind of combo cards. I get asked about this one a lot. Somebody sees my report and I like that. That's really small. Like how'd you make it? And I can recommend the video that I built off of that.
What's the name of the developer of that?
Yeah, great question. Let me just show it in the marketplace. So the question is, who created that Sparkline? I am connected. Yep, connected to Wi-Fi. OK Viz. Make a lot of cool stuff. They have Sparklines, candlesticks, dot plots, synaptic panels, all sorts of stuff. And everything that I've used by them has been top quality. They make really, really good visuals. I mean, you can even see it enforced by the fact that even with the seizures that are happening with these reviews, they're all 4s and 5s out of 5. To give you a comparison, that Histogram, not as well reviewed. It used to be 2. Somebody actually gave it some good reviews, but this is that built-in one that, hey, they updated it. Maybe that's why they finally got some better reviews. Previously, like 6 months ago, that said like 1/8/2017. It's a very, very old app, so they finally got around to updating it. But yeah, OK Viz, very, very good. The only other one that I can think that's better than them is a company called Zebra Analytics. They make a bunch of custom visuals, but they're mostly paid. They're really, really good, especially for accounting and stuff, but they're all subscription-based because of how many features they have. These are the best of the free ones. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put up some links here and then answer any other questions we have as well. Throw this up. QR codes.
Up on the Power BI user group library as well.
Yep. Screen recording always eats up so much. There we go. OK. QR code takes you to my main site. don't actually have it in front of me, so I have to kind of point now. Oh, come on.
I have a question while you're waiting.
Okay. Yes.
Do you use bookmarks very much at all?
I used to more. I'm using them less now. One thing that I like the filters pane is something I still use with bookmarks occasionally, but it also is a lot more expensive. So as long as you're using the Power BI Service portal, the new filters pane accomplishes a lot of that. If there's things where I need to actually change visuals, I will use that. So let's say there's a toggle between somebody wants a line to a column chart. Without bookmarks to basically toggle selection, there's not really any other way to do that. So it's usually the web-like elements that people want, like a pop-up window and stuff like that. I'll still utilize bookmarks, but the problem is I've found that it's very difficult to hand that off to almost anybody. I know how to update bookmarks, and sometimes I still make a mistake, and I'm really good at it. Trying to teach that to a person who's just not kind of familiar with Power BI, especially with filters, there's a good chance that they miss something, and now that button will apply the incorrect filter, and that can cause issues with production. So I like custom visuals. They're useful, but I try to avoid them unless they're absolutely necessary for a requirement. Good question, though. All right, yeah, so let me just walk you through this a bit. The QR code will take you to my main page. The presentation PDF that I have from tonight I'll upload later. That will be available there, as well as just like the types of stuff that I do as far as consulting services, training, etc. And just anything related to Power BI, data modeling, even Azure as well. I also do have a series of files and templates, like the Google Analytics report. If you have that data, it's a template that can plug and play to your data and is available actually as a download and purchase as well. I've started to templatize a lot of stuff as I've gotten a lot better with this. And there's a code that will last for about 30 days that will get you 30% off anything you see available for purchase in the download store there as well. I like to give that as a thank you for people who are coming on their evenings and attending one of these. Last but not least, YouTube channel. I have a video that goes out every Tuesday, anything from about 5 to 10 minutes long and covers a large range of topics. Quite a few of the stuff that you saw here is available as a video there, as well as some that I haven't made a video yet, but I will someday. But it's just everything related to Power BI, the service, tips, tricks. Basically, if I think of something that's useful, I make a note about it on a long list of blog ideas that I have, and I eventually make a video on it. So it's a really good resource just to get up to speed, and also to hear about any important updates that are available for Power BI when they do monthly releases. Any other questions before we at least adjourn the official thing and kind of mingle for a while?
Yeah. Have you found any good solutions for small multiples? It seems like
that's such a common question. Yeah, it's a great question.
solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's you want to be able to right click on an element and just like show me as a percentage of other value or something like that. I built DAX measures that have done that. The quickest and easiest one is I have a measure that uses some all functions and stuff that I add to the tooltips. So if you hover over anything, it shows this number is the percentage of column total, this number is percentage of row total, this number is the percentage of the subtotal. So common percentages that you would usually want to see, or comparisons maybe of other elements, will be in there, including just the actual delta. This is 8,000 off from whatever other numbers are in there. But that's what I've built kind of as a standard, and then there's not any perfect solution for it at the moment. Yeah, I know other software tools do it better. It's a heavily requested feature of Microsoft. I know they're exploring it at the moment to get some multiple-like feature in their matrix tables. Any other questions? Yeah.
What is your name? All of your style.
Oh, yeah, well, it's Reid Havens.
Reid Havens.
Yep, Havens Consulting is the company that I run, and I've been doing this for about 5 years now. It was on the intro slide when they brought it. Yeah.
I missed it, so I was just like, "Where is your
Yeah,
name?"
yeah. I usually don't like to plaster my name up big in letters too many times, and I'll try to be humble about it. Any other questions?
On the Sparkline for the OK Biz, the starting and ending point, are there options besides, like, I know you use circles and different colors? Is there different options for starting and ending points, or is it?
In terms of the icon being used?
Yeah.
That's a good question. On the built-in, the data point things on the built-in line chart do have like the squares, circle, diamond, etc. Last I've seen, it's only circles that are on the custom Sparkline. You do have the customization to choose to turn on, just like the one in Excel, like high and low callouts, the start and end, and then the colors. But I believe it's just only circles at the moment for that one. Yep, no problem. Any other questions?
For your templates you've been doing, have you tried the new app templates or template?
Oh yeah, I have 6 of them in the Microsoft Store. The Google Analytics one's it's done very well. It's been downloaded like 4,000 times. So yeah, that's actually that doubled my site traffic between May and June visits to my website, which I'm very happy with. But it's a great new thing for those not familiar. It was in preview for about 6 months or so, as you basically can have B2B where you can go to the Microsoft kind of app store essentially that they have online, or like the Office store, and there's a bunch of Power BI templates that a lot of them like have plug and play data. You basically just sign up, put your email address and your details in there, and then it has a Power BI link that opens up in Power BI service, has you log in with your just whatever your login for your tenant is, and then it adds an app workspace right in there with usually a parameter that pops up, asks you to log into your MailChimp or your Salesforce data, and then it generates the report for you with your data in it. So it's a really nice way to templatize reporting that has common data sources that can help you have like more plug and play demos of a lot of data to explore without having to pay somebody 60 hours to build it for you. Any other questions? All right. Other than that, I'm happy with the size of the group that showed up tonight. I appreciate all of you for coming and giving up your evening to listen to me rant about cool stuff in Power BI. I'll be hanging out here for a little while afterwards as well if anybody has any further questions. But otherwise, thank you for coming.